The degenerate son of the divine father, the magnificent Marcus Aurelius and the hated Commodus. Or maybe more degenerate father than son. To be honest, I was counting on Spielberg having the courage to end the myth of the wonderful, outstanding Marcus Aurelius. A myth that is unfortunately still alive. A man who is still praised to the skies, but in reality his masterpiece should be burned, and we as Christians should thank Commodus, because he was the first to take an interest in the poor and try to equalize Christianity in rights. He paid for this by endowing with hatred until modern times, and Roman propaganda is to blame for this. It is simply amazing how the authorities of the Senate transformed emperors into demons for centuries, who at least in a minimal way wanted to improve the lives of the poor, and moved away from the oligarchy that had everything. I also hoped that Lucilla would stop being made out to be a virtuous lady, because she was famous for being the cheapest Roman whore, in which she was equal to her mother. Meanwhile, in the second part of Gladiator we have almost the mother of God. While the romance with Commodus was most appropriate, but she was the one who showed sick tendencies, which even ancient historians indicate, suffering for Rome and, to make it funnier, striving to restore the Republic starting with Marcus Aurelius is a joke. It's a joke since great Augustus, first and last mental healthy Roman emperor. Gladiator 2 is certainly not a bad film, but the team from the first part did not work here. Spielberg tells his stories. It's worth remembering. He changes the facts. Too many of them were changed here. Caracalla killed Geta for rather primitive but understandable reasons and did not rule with him. We owe thanks to him the extension of citizenship beyond the inhabitants of the city of Rome to equal rights, for which he also paid. All inhabitants of the empire were citizens of the country from that moment on. It was a precedent. He himself came from Great Britain, so maybe that was the reason. Definitely baboons, who knows what they are. This rhinoceros can still be forgiven, although if elephants were taken. Rhinoceroses have poor eyesight and a huge problem with accepting anything that is on their back. They would not accept a saddle. Certainly no one transported sharks to the Naumachia. Ostia is indeed much further from the sea today than in ancient times, but still, there is a lot of distance between ancient Ostia and Caput Mundi. It has turned into a miracle of AI technology, but it makes no sense. Too many fantasy. Let's get back to Commodus, whose role was played perfectly by Joaquin Phoenix. Really, no one has ever played such a difficult personality with a mental illness better, because this illness ran in this family. In addition, there was the innate bloodshed of Rome, the heir of which is primarily Spain. Contempt for life is characteristic of the entire Mediterranean basin of the Eurasian zone, but Rome was the cradle of this plague, and not so much Italy as Spain is primarily heir. We forget that this country still had communities of people living in caves in the 60s, but that is no excuse. Turkish actor Boran Kozum did a great job playing Sultan Mustafa, and I really don't see any more candidates. Commodus was definitely the least guilty of the whole family, but he did not fit in with the Senate and became guilty of the evil of the world. Many years ago I wrote a novel set in Commodus times. It is a security of inheritance for my mother and her eternal debt. I don't particularly care about this, but I had to look for biographical data. Not on the net, but in books and archives. At that time, several interesting documents issued by Commodus were also discovered, which allow us to say with confidence that he was a ruler of the people. Probably only so that Daddy would not fall off his pedestal. They were not widely publicized. What was Commodus like? Commodus is not considered one of the best rulers of Rome, but his father was. He was an outstanding thinker, philosopher from the ancient times, often called the last outstanding ruler of the Roman Empire. What was the truth about this family and Marcus Aurelius? Contrary to appearances, this is the greatest myth that historians, the Roman Senate, and above all the generals, who are employed thanks to him, have managed to build, but who brought the country's budget to ruin. Vindobona was not willing to become part of the empire, but the son paid for this huge budget hole and continues to pay. Marcus Aurelius was worse than a tyrant in private, and his son became the greatest victim of his father. Marcus Aurelius took to get this done and didn't have to answer to anybody, but in reality he did not have that much power. The myth of Marcus Aurelius was already partially overthrown by the film Gladiator, one of the first great masterpieces by Ridley Scott, and the film referred to the difficult relationship between father and son. However, it was not said what they resulted from. Marcus Aurelius can be compared to some modern psychologists who take money for a service, give good advice, or agree with the client, but do not apply this advice to themselves. Such modern con artists, in such cases it is definitely better and cheaper to go to a priest, rabbi or other representative of religion, than to someone like that, or talk to a wall. Medicine is associated with charlatanism, and it is always worth remembering this, as a well-known professor from Harvard says, debunking mainstream propaganda myths, also dealing with brainwashing, because he cooperated with the secret services. There is also a lot of psychology in all kinds of theology and, contrary to appearances, it is better taught because it is also focused on what is not fully researched, and this does not have to mean that it does not exist. Modern psychology strongly rejects all teachings about true human nature, and its main task is to actually fit the individual into society, omitting the fact that many of these outstanding masters of psychology should be locked up together with patients. If a psychologist cannot apply his advice to his family life, it means that he is bad at his job. As the author of a well-known book on manipulation wrote, it is worth checking this before you use the advice of such a person. The best preserved image of Marcus Aurelius is undoubtedly a gigantic equestrian statue cast from an alloy of gold and bronze. It is the first equestrian statue in history, and at the same time a symbol of the times of an outstanding ruler. Marcus Aurelius' family did not come from Italy, but from Spain. Caesar emphasizes many times how much he owes this to his mother, to whom, I owe her the spirit of piety and charity. And the aversion not only to doing harm, but even to the thought of it, but he himself harms everyone he meets on his way, and manipulates people at will. He did the greatest harm to his children, whom he manipulated and set against each other, creating a sick rivalry. It should also be added that Marcus Aurelius, although he considered himself a philosopher and moralized everyone about abstinence, was himself a sex addict, had numerous affairs, and had 13 children with his own wife. Yes, in those times the mortality rate was high, and during the lifetime of Marcus Aurelius and Commodus the Roman Empire would constantly be plagued by an epidemic, but this was still a huge number of offspring for representatives of the patricians. In 138 he was adopted by Antoninus Pius, who appointed him his successor along with Luciferian. This was a popular procedure, even in the times of Byzantium, when the ruler had no son, he adopted a man, recognizing him as Caesar. However, the ruler usually appointed one successor, not two. This is a precedent, but perhaps Pius had his reasons for it. The bond between the two families was further cemented by Aurelius' marriage to Faustina, through which he also became the son-in-law of his adoptive father. At the same time, Antoninus Pius adopted Luciferian, who married the young daughter of Marcus Aurelius, Lucilla. Lucilla hated her husband because of his age, but despite this, the title of Augusta quickly went to her head. She was every inch the child of her parents. She cheated on her husband with senators and servants, and there were rumors in ancient times about Lucilla's incestuous relationship with Commodus, from which one child was to be born out of her oldest children. More than likely. In fact, even if it is just a legend, later events show that there may be a grain of truth in it. Lucilla will become her brother's greatest enemy solely out of jealousy, because he dared to get married. This woman did not hide the fact that her feelings were not sisterly, and since her brother does not want her, I will bring him to Tartarus. According to Marcus Aurelius, his wife was a virtuous woman, but unfaithful, debauched, and she chose her lovers from among the gladiators, but although Marcus Aurelius complains about her, he emphasizes that it is thanks to her that he is an emperor and that he cannot divorce even for this reason. Poor thing, Faustina is not really indebted to her husband, who owes his position only and exclusively to his marriage. He was a nobody and we admire this manipulator to this day. He has deceived us so much. Although today Marcus Aurelius appears as a philosopher, he was a man who embodied all the features of the Roman Empire. He was above all a bloodthirsty warrior, and it was not Commodus, but the wars led by Marcus Aurelius and the subsequent civil war that led to the ruin of the state budget. Marcus Aurelius is also the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. No one feels it yet, but historians agree on it. Expanding the empire to the limits of endurance that he led, starting the recruitment from the colonies, because that is what de facto the parts of the Roman Empire outside of Caput Mundi are, will have a powerful ricochet. Pius was not entirely sure who should become Caesar, as evidenced by his double adoption. Verus was an educated man with a gentle disposition, loved by the people. Marcus Aurelius, on the other hand, was a warrior with a passion for blood, whom ordinary citizens no longer like much, but suits the elite. We grow rich on spoils. People have always grown rich in war. The rabble does not grow rich, but the state needs wars. In all of this, it was always about assets. Movable property, not always legal, which in times of war can be introduced to the market, multiplied then legalized. Pius did not see virtue in Marcus Aurelius. Perhaps that is why Pius decided to divide power, which would ensure that care would be taken over both fractions. In this way, he wanted the two different elements to complement each other. Verus would become the first husband of Marcus Aurelius' daughter, Lucilla. He was incorruptible and did not like military expeditions. This certainly bothered all the patricians, because Rome functions thanks to bribes. This no corruption certainly does not please Marcus Aurelius himself, who also benefits from it. Verus will disappear in mysterious circumstances, during an epidemic, as soon as the people start to love him more than a co-ruler and show it directly. From then on, Aurelius can do whatever he wants. Some authors say directly that he was poisoned. Marcus Aurelius could certainly only gain from this, as could Lucilla, but she miscalculated, because her father married her off again to the even older Pompeianus, with whom he fought in many battles. Pompeianus is a very calm and composed man, who will try to calm down the conflict between Commodus and Lucilla throughout his life, in vain. Evidence of help in Verus' death can be the presence of the legendary physician Galen, who is something like the private physician of Marcus Aurelius' family. Unfortunately, we also admire him, although with deeper analysis. Run away. No wonder Napoleon asked directly about how many people he had killed before visiting the doctor. Galen is loyal only to him in exchange for access to the bodies of fallen gladiators. This is a fairly low price, but also an exorbitant one. In reality, he began his career as a gladiator doctor in a distant province. Certainly no one would have heard of him if not for a mysterious social promotion. He is the only doctor in Rome who can officially perform autopsies, although it is forbidden by law. Why this promotion, and then immortality? Marcus Aurelius was most fond of female gladiators, something attracted both spouses to this profession. It is worth noting that these are already times when free people can also be gladiators. It is a well-paid profession, and after 13 years you can leave it almost as rich as Caesar or even more. One version says that it was Faustina who fathered Commodus with a gladiator, because Caesar himself had problems fathering a son. There may be something to this, because most of Marcus Aurelius' children are daughters, and as we know, a Y chromosome is needed. He will only have 3 sons. Commodus was born with a twin brother who did not survive. Secondly, it was Aurelius who fathered him with a gladiator X, because his wife was unable to give him a son. Regardless of which version we consider true, one of the parents was not the biological creator of Commodus. As children, Commodus and his brother Annius fall ill with some strange disease. Their doctor is Galen, but only one of the boys survives. Commodus will nevertheless grow up to be a strong boy, but he will never be treated well by his father. Marcus Aurelius is officially proud of having a son, but privately he despises him. It is a mistake to think that Commodus was neglected educationally. On the contrary, all documents that are found testify that Caesar received a thorough education, but did not receive one acceptance and love. It was to remain so until the end of his days. Faustina is a warrior woman. She accompanies her husband even during military expeditions, including the most tragic one on the Danube border. When she died, Caesar organized a magnificent funeral for her. If she had been unfaithful, he probably would not have done it, although he could have done it to hide the fact that he had killed his wife. Rumors about her death are also multiplying. According to legends, one day the father takes the young Commodus to a gladiator show. Here again, the versions are contradictory, some say about a man, others about a woman. In any case, when a gladiator or a gladiatrix dies in a cruel way, Marcus Aurelius turns to his son, "That whore was your real mother, she deserved no more," or father. Anger begins to stir in the young teenage boy. Legend or not, the fact is that the father hated his son, and his sister showed sick pedophile tendencies, and later a sick incestuous love. The son did everything to gain his father's approval. The problem is that from people like Marcus Aurelius you will not gain approval. He is not a person who loves something beyond himself, and this gave rise to anger. The functioning of families has not changed since the dawn of time. During the battles on the Danube, a young son, not yet 20, joins his father. Caesar dies of an unexplained disease, in a military camp called Vindobona. Rumors about the anointing of a certain commander to the throne, the rejection of Commodus and the poisoning of his father, spread already in the camp. Commodus will found a city in this place, which will eventually become Vienna. Today, few people remember it, but it was he who laid the foundations for this city, not Marcus Aurelius. Ankara is a symbol of Vienna, showing the most important rulers. There is a joke about the clock itself, or rather several. Eugene de Savoy was by no means the ruler of Vienna, although he could have been. He wanted to unite Italy. And he really started the Risorgimento. The first hour in Marcus Aurelius. Again, a wonderful, magnificent father. In the description at the first hour we see Marcus Aurelius. This is also the first character, although the author of the clock had doubts about how to behave, but propaganda won. Marcus Aurelius dropped dead long before the city's status was sanctioned. History is brutal in this matter. Vindobona was founded by Commodus, but once again the myth of the father won. It would have been better to place him than son in a propaganda way. Of course, always is possible to say that in those times history was taught even worse than today. Suetonius was no longer so cruel to Commodus, and yet he is rarely quoted on this subject. Commodus does not understand this war. He believes that there is no need to expand the borders of the empire and kill his people. The man realizes that as soon as the Roman troops leave, the tribes will rebel, which will cause further costs and wars. He has a poor budget. His father embezzled money with his sister on a much larger scale than his predecessors. Rome's power will be only theoretical in these lands. Secondly, Commodus realizes that the treasury is empty and he has a choice between sponsoring an expensive war or leaving money for the inhabitants of his country. The relationship between father and son certainly also suggests such a decision. This is in open opposition to his father, who demanded the continuation of the war in his will. He will negate all of his father's achievements, trying to become a real ruler, and what is worse, he bases this power on the people, and this is what Rome, the patricians, hate. The Romans, despite all this, are happy that the war is over, the fighting in the amphitheaters will return, and a new Caesar is returning to the capital. Commodus may also be afraid for the capital, perhaps some news is reaching him. Today, one can assess Commodus' decision in different ways, but the truth is that he had no choice. The country is on the verge of bankruptcy, and the longer he is away from the capital, the more conspiracies are formed against him, because many believe that they should rule Rome. Despite this, in all the cities he visits, he is greeted with reverence and admiration. The situation changes dramatically in Rome. Those who held the reins of government are trying to remove Caesar from power at all costs, by giving him mistresses, lovers, organizing orgies. They are spoiling the man more and more and taking power for themselves. Despised all his life, Commodus begins to forget himself in all this, but at the same time tries to fight it. He is undoubtedly a very complicated man, or his biographies are very falsified. Defiantly, it is not at all as Cassius Dio presents the biography of Caesar, but quite the opposite, as evidenced by certain preserved documents that have recently been discovered. The main instigator of the orgy is primarily the Praetorian prefect Perennis, a faithful, greedy and overly ambitious man, but were these orgies really there? First of all, it should be emphasized that all the rumors about Commodus's debauched life are spread by Lucilla, who has already charmed most of the senators with her charms, regardless of the fact that her husband is at home at the time. Lucilla is driven by many motives. First of all, this woman believes that she deserves the throne. It is amazing how much power has gone to her head and the woman has lost logical reasoning. A female Caesar on the throne is simply impossible in the Roman Empire. History has shown this many times, and Julius Caesar himself died for wanting to rule the world with Cleopatra. Secondly, the woman is jealous of her brother's wife, who is now officially in Augusta. Lucilla does not intend to give up the title and continues to call herself that, causing embarrassment to the patricians and her brother. She continues to demand all the privileges associated with the title. The sister starts public rows with her brother about his wife taking the place before her because she is an Augusta, not a wife, although it is the wife who deserves it. Commodus tries to get out of troublesome situations in every possible way, but this always arouses the dislike of his sister or wife. Finally, Commodus rebels against his sister for the first time and emphasizes that the wife is an Augusta. Lucilla cannot stand this. She chooses her lover, Senator Quintanius, as the assassin, who is to kill her brother when he is having fun during gladiator fights, acting as one of them. This is real Lucilla. In this way, she wants to get rid of everyone in her path and, as the only descendant of the family, sit on the throne with her lover, who will be a puppet in the hands of his wife, and then place her son on the throne. Their family members join the conspiracy. However, instead of simply killing Caesar, this man gives a speech about the need to kill Caesar and only then theatrically takes out his dagger. He definitely mixed up the places and delayed the action. The Praetorians react, the senator dies, Lucilla is exiled to Capri along with several other women from the family and killed there. She really deserved it. The film defends her too much. There is no reason to change her story, real story is more interesting. She is November Virgin Mary. Both opponents and supporters agreed on this aspect. Lucilla exceeded the norms. The remaining members of the conspiracy are to die as gladiators. This conspiracy has a huge impact on Commodus' psyche, who begins to fear his own shadow. Pompeianus, who certainly knew about the conspiracy, did not show up at the games that day, which saved his life. Perhaps he did not want to stand between his brother and sister. A common sensible elderly man by nature could have hoped that Lucilla would come to her senses. Did the legendary Marcia appear in Commodus' life at this time? Who knows? Marcia is Commodus's downfall, but he doesn't know it yet. She was the daughter of the woman who had been liberated by Varus and the lover of Marcus Aurelius Quadratus, who was Commodus's nephew. In reality, this woman would go through the beds of everyone in the family to get to Caesar. Was she the reason why Caesar sent his wife to Capri a few years later? It is not known. This separation is unclear, although some historians claim that Commodus discovered that she had also participated in the plot to kill him, and others that she had been cheating on him. Little is known about Brutia Crispina, apart from the fact that she was a very beautiful woman. Today, we are not yet able to say what was the real reason for the exile. Commodus changes. First of all, he eliminates the Praetorian Guard and creates a new one from gladiators. As the reason for this, the commander of the guard was involved in the plot. At the same time, the ruler begins to desire to be a ruler and wants to show the patricians that they cannot raise their hands against the ruler. What Roman historians call terror is really only and exclusively taking away what is due to the ruler and punishing the conspirators. Cassius Dio writes extensively about confiscations of property and arrests. However, he does not mention why this is happening. He only laments the loss of freedom, but the truth is that the patricians had too much freedom and Commodus sees it. He himself is a victim of these freedoms. Caesar was the first in history to create an official secret police. Initially, it was to investigate in depth who, apart from family members, was behind the conspiracy, and the number of names multiplied. Additionally, more conspiracies are formed, because the tyrant must be overthrown. Their freedoms were attacked, and who cares about the state budget and the rabble? They will be satisfied with millet. In some countries we still hear the same. The black legend of Commodus is mainly created by Cassius Dio, from whom Caesar dared to confiscate part of the property not entirely acquired legally. From now on, he will put obstacles in his way in the Senate. He slandered and did everything to destroy. The patricians are used to trading and bribery, and Commodus wants to be a true ruler at all costs, because he thinks that only if he becomes someone like Augustus or Tiberius will he survive. He is not far wrong, but the inflated society will not allow him to do so. Gone are the days of such loyalty as was to the ruler at the beginning of the empire. The ruler is also tormented by a hole in the budget and is aware of why it exists. Commodus, like Nero, is the ruler of the poor. He will be worshipped by them and will pay the highest price for it. When a petition from the residents of one of the colonies in Africa reaches Commodus' desk, asking for help in a dispute with a tenant of a domain who does not comply with the law of Vespasian and increases taxes without the knowledge of Caesar, Commodus intercedes for the city's inhabitants and orders to adhere to the legal commandments. This is one of the slaps in the face aimed at the patricians that we have only recently learned about. Commodus also tightens the tax laws, and this cannot please any of the patricians, who use their position and do everything to avoid paying taxes. Another disappointment is Perennis, who sells the positions of commanders and governors. His personnel policy causes the legions in Britain to rebel due to their ill treatment, and they have a reason. The governor of Britain moved the border of the empire back to the Antonine walls. However, he was very brutal and did not understand the differences in the region at all, where military headquarters were in a sense also family homes, and soldiers entered into relationships with locals. The governor orders the execution of a general who won a battle because of his opposition to the treatment of soldiers. Instead of thanking the soldiers, Perennis decides with the governor to transfer troops to fight Maternus. It is to him that the character played by Russell Crowe loosely refers in the film. This man rose up against Commodus, in defense of the enslaved Lucilla, who certainly paid for his army from Capri. It was then that the woman would be killed along with her companions. Maternus would be defeated, but Perennis caused several hundred armed and skilled soldiers to march on Rome and threatened to plunder it if Caesar did not sit down with them to talk and kill Titus Perennis and deal with the governor. Dion blames Commodus for the subsequent events, but the truth is that Caesar could not allow the city to be slaughtered, and there were no better trained troops than the British. Commodus was hailed as Britannicus. Until recently, it was believed that he had never been to the islands. Today, it is believed that he could have taken part in the battles to the Picts and single-handedly led to the final shift of the empire's border, which is where his nickname came from, Second Britannicus. However, this was a commendable act, so it was deliberately removed from the annals. Legions did not give such nicknames solely for issuing a legal act. Interestingly, at the time when the battles for the empire's border were taking place, the future ruler Severus was in Britain, and he took credit for many of Commodus's achievements. Severus is father of Caracalla and Gita. It is possible that both of them could have fought there. Commodus certainly knew how to fight very well. After all, he was the one who brought the conflict on the Danube to an end, and several battles took place before the treaty was signed. Pertinax will become the new governor of Britain. Thanks to Marcia, Commodus becomes familiar with Christianity. Perhaps he secretly practiced this religion himself, which historians are increasingly inclined to accept as a fact, and this could no longer be forgiven. However, this is an assumption. It is certain that he is the first known Caesar to exchange letters with the Bishop of Rome. We did not know this at the time of the creation of the first part of Gladiator, but it was groundbreaking and could not have pleased the senators. He is in close relations with the bishop and makes certain concessions in favor of Christians, and also buys out several of them sent to forced labor. This certainly does not please any well-born Roman. Commodus will never marry again, but he will find solace in the arms of his slave Marcia, supposedly also a woman who knew how to fight. Marcia in fact to the end was loyal to Verus' family. That relationship was created just for Kill, son of Aurelius. Marcia will receive all the privileges of a wife, and will also draw her partner's attention to the fate of Christians. Perhaps it was she who suggested to him that he base his power on them and eliminate the old system. After a rebellion in Britain, which was fortunate for him, as a result of which Perennis had to lose his head and he himself gained the favor of the legions, it seemed that Caesar would be able to rule alone, but Commodus has learned nothing from history, like most people. Here another mediocrity drawn from the people appears: Gladiator, a greedy bribe-taker, robbing the state budget. It is during this period that Commodus withdraws from politics and spends all his time with Marcia and the lovers of both sexes that she suggests. Caesar, falling into paranoia, lives outside the city and rarely visits Rome, fearing an assassination attempt. Now his position is stabilized, but in fact he was really made to believe that. At the same time, Gladiator is robbing the treasury, and what is worse, he is keeping grain that was sent from Alexandria to Rome in the pantries. The harvest was not very abundant and, fearing starvation, Caesar sent grain to Alexandria to protect the inhabitants from starvation. Caesar did the right thing, but he trusted the people again. Some time ago, he introduced fixed prices for basic food products by law, so that everyone, even the poorest, could provide themselves with basic food. This does not please the patricians, who made fortunes on price manipulation. It is the basis of their income. The brutal truth, and still it's unacceptable for some. Keeping the grain has only one goal. Grain suddenly appears on the black market, people are starving, and its prices are sky high. The epidemic returns. The rich are counting on people to blame Commodus. They are not wrong, but the conspiracy is discovered and Gladiator will also lose his head. The patricians wanted to show Caesar in this way that if they wanted to, they would do whatever they wanted, and he was their hostage. They ridiculed him in a primitive way, but it was this fact that would be remembered, not the fact that Caesar brought food to the poorest districts. After the death of Gladiator, the grain returned to markets. As if that were not enough, a fire broke out in the city. It was definitely worse than the one in Nero's times. Of course, the poor districts were burning, which no one was extinguishing, and the residents would only start to deal with the fire when it started to approach the districts of the rich and the Forum Boarium. Many people died, but the only who cared about them is Caesar, not the rich. The latter in most cases would not be harmed. The fire raged for several days and even consumed one of Caesar's city palaces, and the cause of this was certainly the fact that the fire was extinguished too late, as well as the eternal problem of the city, the wooden huts of the poor districts. Commodus arrives in the capital, and although Dion does not write about it, today we know that he orders the remains of the palace to be donated to rebuild the districts for the poor. Caesar has had enough of the city's constant fires and decides to build decent houses in the poor districts, made of brick and stone, not wood. The inspection reveals a number of irregularities in the houses that we would now call tenement houses. The owners suffer the consequences. A surprisingly current problem to this day. Commodus builds a new district, Colonia Comagena, but the patricians hate him so much that it will be written in the pages of history that Caesar renamed Rome, when in fact it was only the name of a district. The main culprits of this are Cassius Dio, who also hates Caesar, because like all the patricians and senators he is losing influence and his income is decreasing. Unfortunately for Commodus, he is a historian. The young man is poisoned by Marcia. One reason for her behavior may be revenge for Verus, and the other may be the stories about Commodus throwing a servant into the furnace. Lucilla created these stories as soon as her brother ascended the throne. Marcia may have been a relative of the servant, but there is no evidence that Commodus did it, not his brother. There is no evidence that such a thing even happened. According to legends, a friendly servant or Marcia herself noticed a proscription with Marcia's name on Commodus' desk. Marcia takes action. In fact, she poisoned Caesar for some time, which may be the reason for his unstable behavior, which manifests itself at the end of his short life. However, it is not that simple, because the man's body is strong. Marcia certainly did not obtain the poison herself. Someone helped her. Was it Pertinax or Galen or Dion? For Severus, all of them paid for this death. Besides, he grew rich from war, he cut off their heads, so he must have had knowledge of the subject. Severus is considered the last Caesar who has any idea about governing, and it can be said that he prolonged the empire's agony by briefly saving it. Commodus, contrary to legend, was not a greater cruelty than the rest of the Romans. We know more and more about him, and a picture of a completely different man emerges than previously thought. He is a complicated man. His profile is still unclear. His life was greatly influenced by his childhood in a dysfunctional family. He was not accepted, and his sister may have even molested him as a child. Women can also be pedophiles. Many forgotten about it, but if we are to protect our children by knowing about it, we have to say that it is not related to any profession or gender. People from such homes develop two extreme patterns. Some will be lone wolves and will not be able to trust other people, build any relationships, for fear of rejection. Others will seek this acceptance. The first model is definitely better for a ruler. In the second personality model, there is low self-esteem and any compliment is enough to blindly trust someone, and there are always plenty of clackers around a ruler. By analyzing the history of Rome we can be sure that the end of wars, and above all the interest in the poor and followers of the new religion striving to stop persecution, cannot please the elites. New documents have been discovered in Tunisia. He loves gladiator fights and takes part in them. That is the only difference between him and other Caesars. He does not differ from the rest of the Romans in his love of bloodshed, nor does he differ from the rest of the Romans in his love of orgies. Perhaps he wants to release his past in this way, or as some would like it as an act of desperation, in order to gain the favor of the people in this way. It certainly wasn't easy for him, because a lot happened during his reign. Today we would say that he couldn't do anything about the epidemic, fire or poor harvests, but people at the time were superstitious and saw it differently. The murder of his biological parent had a huge impact on Commodus' psyche. No one remembers that Commodus was an outstanding engineer. He created rotating chariots, as well as carts to transport larger numbers of soldiers, or a vehicle with a reclining seat. In this he fulfilled himself. Commodus became the evil shadow of Marcus Aurelius, but he was not him. On the contrary, he tried to come out of the shadow, and that is why he was dangerous, and Christians should be grateful to him. He noticed them, and thanks to the fact that these documents survived, although attempts were made to erase them, someone certainly remembered them later and followed up on this trail. Commodus certainly knew about Tiberius' investigation into Jesus, which led to his death at the hands of Caligula. Still, he was intrigued and followed the trail. He didn't really want to be a Christian, but he thought that as Caesar he should also take an interest in these people and start working together. The poison Commodus vomits, so Marcia brings in one of the gladiators to complete the task. For several months before Julian reaches the city, she is confident. Commodus is declared a monster, his corpse desecrated, and the statues toppled. The estate is officially sold to save the budget hole created by him, but this is not true. It was already created during his father's regency, and only Severus will suck dry to the end. Out some reforms rescued country for a while. Marcia and Lectus will be killed under Julian, who was a relative of Commodus. Before this happens, the woman will become what she was for the Praetorians, and she was nothing more than a whore who was striving over dead bodies to achieve her goal. Galen will lose his clinic as a result of a mysterious arson, and most of his works will be lost. Julian seems to have known what he was doing. We don't really know if he still believed in humors, but he was certainly one of the first dangerous doctors toying with life and combining it with politics. He had access to the corpse, but most of his works were actually lost in the fire. He himself will die shortly after this event. Dion will also end up miserable. He will do everything to suck up to Severus at all costs, so he certainly manipulated the history of Commodus to justify his new ruler, thanks to whom he climbs to the top of power in exchange for a suitable history. However, he is cruel and Severus will quickly have to remove him from office. The civil war will end with Severus' accession to the throne. This man will treat the memory of Commodus in two ways. He was probably related to him somehow on his mother's side. Severus will try to restore the ruler's good name, but at the same time he will fear him. Although he will officially include Commodus among the gods, his statues will be restored, and rest of Caesar will be buried with dignity. He will also deny his achievements, and attribute many of them to himself. In this way, further obscuring the true image of Commodus and his rule. But did Commodus really die, or did he do what Nero did? Today, most historians believe that Nero could have managed to fake his own death, because we already know that he saved his daughter in this way. Exactly 1 year after his death, a Christian colony is formed in India, led by a mysterious man from Rome and 2 monks. Right after his coronation, Severus sets off to war with the Parthians, which will destroy Rome and actually lead the country to ruin. He will win, only to lose a moment later. Although Parthians wasn't interesting by Rome in that time. The fighting will drag on forever. Why there? The Parthians haven't attacked for a long time, but it's the way to India. Maybe he wanted to eliminate Commodus. That could be interesting story for movie. With Severus' reign and his wars, the fall of the empire is a foregone conclusion, although he and his historians will blame Commodus. Lucilla's son, Lucius, raised by Pompeianus, who is considered to be the son of Verus or Pompeianus, will become a senator. This boy, who was rumored to be the son of Commodus, will be killed for unexplained reasons by Caracalla. The sequel agrees here, but his mother has been gone for a long time. Pompeianus will outlive Commodus and live to see Severus reign, although one side in the net claims that he was killed earlier. This is not true. Maybe Marcia, like Oct, was loyal and helped Commodus escape from Rome, although looking at her previous actions, this is doubtful, but it cannot be ruled out. It doesn't mean that on his court was someone loyal. Everyone praises Marcus Aurelius without knowing his history in depth. His reflections are still published, although one last page should be written big. One big lie. He fooled you. He did this all his life. Would 2 successors really defend the honor of their predecessor so much if he were mean, cruel, evil? Doubtful. Not in Rome. They would kill a brilliant historian and physician, since they were so useful, rather not. They knew who was behind Commodus's death. We also owe Commodus the invention of a certain type of bearing, but no one knows about it. A big note. Apologies to the son. Commodus is rather hated. He hated his father. Everyone would hate such a father, and he is in fact one of the greatest hypocrites in history. It is high time to show his true face, known only to researchers of the subject. Commodus wanted to be loved, and that was his downfall. But did Commodus, like Henry VIII Tudor, even have a chance for someone to love him selflessly? And that is what he wanted. As ruler, not. Henry as well wasn't beloved child to the end. Henry VIII also did not hear praise from childhood. He was not prepared for the throne. If someone wanted to learn from history, I guess only Joaquin Phoenix could play the role of Commodus so brilliantly. There will be no other such faithful actor to this character. My favorite British series was Ripper Street, a series based partly on the diaries of Edmund Reed, a policeman working on the Jack the Ripper case. I have always been fascinated by this character, or rather why he was never found. Let's not explain this internet rumor. DNA was compared with one victim, but that doesn't mean he killed them all. Even then, it was known about copycats, because the newspapers were infatuated with the subject. Maybe it's true that it was someone from the royal family. After all, after one of the princes was permanently locked up, the murders stopped, and with a mother like Victoria, you could want to take it out on someone. The series showed the brutality of the times when Great Britain was becoming a superpower, and they didn't even forget about the ridiculed Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man. In the last episode, a very wise sentence was said. Edmund Reed walks through the London docks, today a beautiful, but then the worst district. Poverty, dirt, hunger, disease, lack of development prospects, overproduction of unwanted children. Then, someone asked, how could such a beast as Jack the Ripper be born? Edmund answers, beasts are not born, beasts are created. They are created by other people, and precisely what they received in their lives from others. The greatest truth. Everyone can create the beast. It is worth stopping oppressing the employee. Maybe one day he will get revenge. The story of Monte Cristo is so popular, even though its ending is artificially changed, because it is still relevant. Let's take a closer look at Commodus and notice the man in him, and also start reading between the lines, not forgetting that especially in those times history was written by the winners. The monster may turn out not to be so terrible, or maybe he didn't even exist, and there was only a man who wanted to bring order to the state, but the state overwhelmed him so much that he couldn't cope. You will ask, what about Maximus? He also really existed. His name was Decimus Meridius Maximus, but they met Commodus only once, and by no means in the arena, but by accident. As told old Mongolian saying, do not scorn weak cub, he may became brutal tiger. Eternal truth.